The air at the St. Regis Grand Ballroom shimmered thick with the scent of money and Chanel No. 5. Crystal chandeliers dripped light onto a sea of couture gowns and bespoke tuxedos at the annual Vanguard Foundation Gala. For Elara Thorne, this glittering world had become a beautiful cage. She stood beside her husband, the magnate Julian Thorne, a perfect porcelain doll on his arm. But under the polite smiles and the flash of camera bulbs, a storm was brewing. No one in that room could have predicted that within the hour, the velvet ropes and champagne flutes would become the backdrop for a brutal act of humiliation that would shatter a dynasty and ignite a war no one saw coming. The weight of the Thorne diamond necklace felt like a collar on Elara's neck. Each of the 24 flawless diamonds, a personal gift from her husband Julian for her 24th birthday, seemed to absorb the light and warmth of the room, leaving her feeling cold. She ran a gloved finger over the largest stone, a perfect pear-cut centerpiece. Julian had called it the Tear of Elysium. Tonight it felt prophetic. Julian Thorne was not just a man. He was an institution. The CEO of Thorne Industries, a global logistics empire he had inherited and ruthlessly expanded. He moved through the gala like a shark in its own aquarium. People parted for him. Voices hushed. His smile, a brilliant flash of white, rarely reached the cold, calculating blue of his eyes. And for 10 years, Elara had been his most prized acquisition. She had met him when she was a promising architectural student, full of dreams of designing sustainable public spaces. He'd been a guest lecturer at her university. Powerful, charming, and utterly captivating. He'd swept her off her feet, promising her the world. And he had delivered it piece by gleaming hollow piece. Her dreams of architecture were gently put aside, replaced by the full-time job of being Mrs. Thorne charity boards, social events, and managing their sprawling estates in the Hamptons and Lake Como. "Darling, you look breathtaking," Julian murmured, his hand possessively on the small of her back. His touch was no longer a comfort. It was a brand. "Senator Davies is waving us over." "Smile." Elara produced a smile. It was practiced perfect and didn't touch her own eyes. She felt a familiar prickle of unease as they approached the senator's table. In recent months, Julian's affection had cooled to an arctic frost. His compliments felt like commands, his presence an exercise in surveillance. The late-night board meetings and unexplained weekend trips had become more frequent. She wasn't naive, but she had clung to the hope that it was a phase, a symptom of the immense pressure he was under. As Julian engaged the senator in a deep discussion about shipping tariffs, Elara's gaze drifted across the ballroom. And then she saw her, Isabella Vance. She was a junior PR executive at Thorne Industries, a woman who seemed to be made of sharp angles and ambition. Her dress was a slash of crimson silk that clung to her like a second skin, a stark, audacious statement in a room of elegant pastels and classic blacks. Her laughter, loud and throaty, cut through the polite murmur of the crowd, and it was directed at Julian. Across the room, Julian's eyes met Isabella's. It was a fleeting glance, but it contained a universe of secrets. A shared joke, a spark of intimacy, a silent promise. The cold dread in Elara's stomach solidified into a certainty that was as hard and unforgiving as the diamonds around her neck. This wasn't just a dalliance. This was something more. Elara felt the blood drain from her face. She needed air. Excusing herself with a quiet murmur, she made her way towards the terrace, her satin gown rustling against the marble floors. The whispers followed her. "Doesn't she look divine? The perfect couple. He adores her." The words were like tiny, poisonous darts against her skin. On the terrace, the cool night air was a relief. She leaned against the balustrade, looking out over the city lights that glittered like a fallen constellation. She had given up everything for him. Her name, her career, her very identity had been subsumed into his. She was no longer Elara Sterling, the bright young architect. She was Elara Thorne, an accessory. A shadow fell over her, hiding from the adoring public. She turned. It was Isabella Vance. Up close, her beauty was almost aggressive. Her makeup was flawless, her dark hair styled in a severe chic bob. Her smile was a predatory slash of red lipstick. "Just getting some air," Elara replied, her voice more steady than she felt. "It's a wonderful party, isn't it?" Isabella said, her eyes scanning Elara's dress, her jewelry, with a look that was part envy, part appraisal. "Julian has such impeccable taste. In everything." The insinuation was as subtle as a sledgehammer. Elara's hands clenched into fists at her sides. "My husband is a man of high standards, yes?" Isabella laughed, that same throaty sound from across the ballroom. "Oh, I know. He's been telling me all about his standards. He says he's looking to divest from certain assets that are no longer providing a return." She took a step closer, her voice dropping to a conspiratorial whisper. "Face it, Elara, your stock has plummeted. You're a relic from a bygone era in his life, the dutiful little wife. Men like Julian don't want to be dutiful. They want exciting." Every word was a calculated strike designed to wound. Elara felt a surge of fury, hot and sharp, cutting through her shock. "And I suppose you're an exciting new venture." "I'm the future," Isabella stated, her arrogance absolute. "He's just waiting for the right moment to tell you. But I thought I'd give you a heads up. A woman-to-woman courtesy." The courtesy was a declaration of war. Before Elara could formulate a response, Julian appeared at the terrace doors. His face, which had been a mask of public affability, was now dark with irritation. "Elara, what are you doing out here?" "Senator Davies was asking for you." He saw Isabella, and his expression flickered for a fraction of a second, a micro-expression of annoyance that she was there. "Isabella, back to the floor." "Of course, Julian," Isabella said, giving Elara a triumphant little smirk before gliding away. Julian turned his full frigid attention to his wife. "What were you two talking about?" "She was just complimenting the party." Elara lied, her heart hammering against her ribs. "Don't lie to me," he hissed, his voice dangerously low. "I saw your face. You're making a scene." "I'm making a scene," she whispered, incredulous. "Julian, she practically told me you two are enough." He snapped, his grip tightening on her arm. "You are my wife. You will stand by my side, you will smile, and you will not embarrass me. Is that understood?" The pressure on her arm was painful. "This conversation is over. We are going back inside." He didn't wait for her reply. He began to pull her back towards the ballroom doors, his fingers digging into her flesh. She stumbled, trying to regain her footing and her dignity. This was the moment she should have screamed, should have fought back. But a decade of conditioning of being the placid, perfect Mrs. Thorne had stolen her voice. She allowed him to lead her back into the glittering cage, her mind reeling, completely unaware that the polite performance was over and the true, brutal spectacle was about to begin. The return to the ballroom was a surreal blur. The orchestra swelled, playing a soaring waltz, but to Elara it sounded like a funeral dirge. The glittering lights of the chandeliers seemed to mock her, illuminating the charade she was forced to play. Julian's hand was a manacle on her arm, his smile a rictus of civility, pasted on for the benefit of their audience. He guided her back to their table, where a circle of business titans and their wives greeted them with oblivious pleasantries. "There you are." "We were just saying, Julian, you have the most beautiful wife in New York," boomed Marcus Blackwood, a shipping rival with a booming voice and a disingenuous smile. "I'm a lucky man." Julian said the words, tasting like ash in Ilara's mouth. He squeezed her arm again, a silent command. "Play along." Ilara forced another smile, her facial muscles aching from the effort. She felt hundreds of eyes on her, yet she had never felt more invisible. She was a ghost at her own feast, watching her life crumble from a distance. Her gaze kept darting towards Isabella, who was now holding court near the bar, laughing with a group of younger executives, occasionally flicking her eyes towards their table with undisguised contempt. The gala's host, a famed philanthropist, took the stage to begin the charity auction. Item after item went for astronomical sums a week on a private yacht, a Picasso sketch, a bespoke sports car. Julian, ever the showman, entered a bidding war for a rare bottle of 1945 Romanée Conti wine, driving the price up to $250,000 with a flick of his wrist. The room applauded his largesse. Ilara felt sick. It was all a game, a display of power and dominance. He wasn't buying wine, he was buying adoration. It was during the final auction item, a private concert with a world-renowned pianist, that Julian leaned in close, his breath warm and laced with expensive whiskey. "I need to have a word with my CFO. Stay here. Don't move." It wasn't a request. He stood and walked away, not towards his CFO, but directly towards the bar, where Isabella was standing. Ilara watched, frozen, as he placed a hand on the small of Isabella's back, the exact same gesture he had used on her all night. But this time it was different. It was intimate, familiar. Isabella leaned into him, whispering something in his ear. Julian threw his head back and laughed, a genuine, uninhibited laugh that Ilara hadn't heard directed at her in years. The sight was a physical blow. The air rushed from her lungs. The polite fiction they had maintained all evening, all year, was shattered by that single public gesture. The whispers around the table died down. Heads began to turn. Marcus Blackwood's wife, Catherine, gave Ilara a pitying look that was worse than any insult. This was it. The public execution Isabella had promised, fueled by a sudden reckless surge of adrenaline and a decade of suppressed rage. Ilara stood up. Her chair scraped against the floor, the sound unnaturally loud in the momentary lull. She had to know. She had to hear it from him. She walked on trembling legs across the ballroom, her path a straight line to her husband and his mistress. The room seemed to fade into a tunnel with only the three of them at the end. As she approached, she could hear Isabella's syrupy voice. "So I told him if he wants the Apex account, he'll have to go through me. And Julian, darling, you should have seen his face." "Julian!" Ilara's voice was a ragged whisper. They both turned. Julian's face hardened into a mask of pure fury. The affable CEO vanished, replaced by the cold tyrant she knew in private. Isabella's expression was one of pure venomous triumph. "What do you think you're doing?" Julian snarled under his breath, trying to keep his voice low, but the anger was palpable. "I want to go home," Ilara said, her voice shaking but firm. "Now." "We'll go home when I say we go home," he retorted. "You are making a spectacle of yourself. Go back to the table." "No," she said, the word feeling foreign and powerful on her tongue. I will not sit there and be humiliated. Not anymore. Isabella chose that moment to twist the knife. She looped her arm through Julian's, pressing herself against his side. Darling, I think your wife is feeling a little overwhelmed. Maybe she needs a glass of water, or a new life. The blatant possessiveness, the casual cruelty of the gesture finally broke something inside Elara. All the years of biting her tongue, of smoothing things over, of accepting his coldness as a byproduct of his genius, it all evaporated in a blaze of white-hot anger. "Get your hands off my husband," Elara said, her voice low and trembling, with a rage she didn't know she possessed. Julian's face went dark. "You've lost your mind." He grabbed her wrist, his grip like iron. "You are leaving, now!" He started to pull her towards the exit, but she resisted, trying to wrench her arm free. "Let go of me, Julian." Her resistance seemed to flip a switch in him. The last vestiges of his public control snapped. In front of the silent, staring elite of New York City, Julian Thorne, the titan of industry, lost his composure. "You want to leave?" he roared, his voice echoing in the cavernous room. The music stuttered to a halt. "Fine, we'll leave." He released her wrist, but only for a second. In a move of shocking primitive brutality, he tangled his hand in her carefully coiffed hair, grabbing a fistful of her long, dark locks near the scalp. A collective gasp went through the ballroom. Elara cried out a sharp sound of pain and disbelief. The pull was agonizing, sending shooting stars of fire across her scalp. He began to drag her. He dragged her past their table, past the horrified faces of their friends and business associates. He dragged her across the gleaming marble floor, her satin shoes skidding her gown, twisting around her legs. The Thorn diamond necklace swung wildly, its cold weight choking her. Camera flashes, once a glamorous backdrop, now exploded in her face like strobing accusatory spotlights. It was a nightmare made real. Each step was a fresh wave of agony and abject shame. Her world narrowed to the searing pain in her head, the rough feel of the carpet as she stumbled from the marble, and the sound of her own ragged breathing. And through it all, one sound cut through her haze of pain and humiliation. It was laughter, clear, high, and triumphant. She twisted her head, her neck screaming in protest, and saw Isabella Vance standing by the bar. Her arms were crossed, her head tilted, and she was watching the entire sordid spectacle with a one delighted smile on her face. She was not just watching, she was savoring it. This was her coronation performed over the broken body of the previous queen. The look in her eyes was one of pure, unadulterated victory. Julian didn't stop until they were in the grand foyer. He shoved her towards the massive oak doors, releasing her hair. Elara crumpled to the floor, landing hard on her hands and knees. She was shaking uncontrollably, her scalp on fire, her mind a whirlwind of white noise. The doorman, a man named Michael, who had always greeted her with a kind smile, stood frozen in shock. Julian loomed over her, his chest heaving. His face was a contorted mask of rage. He straightened his tuxedo jacket, a bizarre gesture of normalcy in the midst of madness. "You wanted to leave," he spat, his voice dripping with venom. "There's the door. Get out. Don't ever come back to my house." He reached into his pocket, pulled out his wallet, and threw a few $100 bills at her feet. They fluttered down onto the pristine floor around her. "For a taxi. You're no longer my concern." With that, he turned on his heel and strode back into the ballroom, leaving her kneeling on the cold floor in her ruined gown, her hair in disarray, with nothing but the laughter of his mistress echoing in her ears. The cold of the marble floor seeped through the thin satin of her gown, a chilling reality check that this was not a dream. For a long moment, Elara remained on her hands and knees in the grand foyer of the St. Regis, unable to move. The world had tilted on its axis. The muffled sounds of the gala restarting within the ballroom, a nervous cough. The tentative restart of the orchestra were an insult to the violence that had just occurred. The doorman, Michael, finally broke his paralysis. He rushed to her side, his face a mess of concern and pity. "Mrs. Thorne? Ma'am, are you all right?" His kindness was the thing that broke her. A choked sob escaped her lips. She couldn't speak. Shame was a physical weight pressing down on her, crushing the air from her lungs. She was Elara Thorne, a woman whose photo graced society pages, a woman envied for her poise and grace. Now she was a heap on the floor, publicly discarded like trash. Michael helped her to her feet, his touch gentle and respectful. "Let me call you a car, ma'am. Please." She shook her head, unable to process the logistics of where. The Hamptons estate, the Fifth Avenue penthouse. They weren't her homes. They were his houses. He had made that brutally clear. She fumbled in her small clutch for her phone, her hands shaking so badly she could barely grip it. The scattered $100 bills on the floor felt like a final obscene gesture of his power over her. She scrolled through her contacts with a trembling thumb, past names of society, friends, who were likely already whispering about her downfall inside that ballroom. She stopped at one name, Chloe. Chloe Jensen had been her best friend in college, her maid of honor, and the one person who had always seen through Julian's glossy facade. A fiercely independent investigative journalist, Chloe had viewed Elara's marriage with loving skepticism from the start. They had drifted apart as Elara was consumed by the demands of Julian's world, but the bond was still there, a lifeline in the darkness. She pressed the call button. Chloe answered on the second ring, her voice sharp and alert. "Elara. It's after midnight. Is everything okay?" "Chloe." Elara whispered the name of a prayer. Can you come get at me?" The words shattered as she said them, and the sobs she had been holding back erupted raw and ragged. "Where are you? What happened?" Chloe's voice was instantly stripped of sleepiness, replaced by urgent concern. "The St. Regis," Elara choked out. Julian, he threw me out." There was a moment of stunned silence. Then, "I'm on my way. Don't move. I'll be there in 15 minutes. The 15 minutes felt like a lifetime. Michael discreetly led her to a small private alcove off the main foyer, shielding her from the curious glances of hotel guests. He brought her a glass of water, his quiet dignity a stark contrast to her husband's barbarism. When Chloe's familiar beat-up hatchback pulled up to the curb, it looked more beautiful to Elara than any limousine she had ever ridden in. Chloe burst out of the driver's side, her eyes taking in Elara's disheveled state, the tear-streaked face, the wild hair, the gown that looked like a costume from another life. Without a word, she wrapped her arms around Elara, holding her tight. In that embrace, 10 years of carefully constructed walls crumbled, and Elara wept. In the safety of Chloe's small, cluttered apartment in the village, an apartment filled with books, research papers, and the scent of coffee, the story came tumbling out. The affair, the confrontation, the dragging, the laughter. Chloe listened, her expression hardening from concern to a cold, simmering fury. "That monster," she said, her voice tight. "That narcissistic, abusive monster. I knew it. I always knew there was something rotten under all that polish. She handed Alara a mug of chamomile tea. First things first. You're staying here. You're safe. Second, we need to think. He won't just let this go. Chloe was right. By 2 a.m., Alara's phone began to buzz incessantly. A text from Julian's personal assistant, Mr. Thorne, has requested the immediate return of the company credit cards. A minute later, an email notification. Your access to the Thorne private banking portal has been suspended. He was cutting her off swiftly and surgically, severing every financial tie that bound them. The tear of Elysium necklace, still around her neck, suddenly felt like stolen property. He's trying to leave you with nothing, Chloe said, pacing the small living room. He thinks he can throw you out, humiliate you, and you'll just disappear. What can I do? Alara asked, her voice hollow. He has the best lawyers in the country. There's a prenup. I signed it without even reading it. I was so in love. We'll find a way around the prenup, Chloe said fiercely. They're not ironclad, especially under circumstances of public abuse and infidelity. But that's not the first move. He attacked you in public, Alara. There were hundreds of witnesses, and paparazzi. As if on cue, Chloe's laptop dinged with a news alert. She opened it, and her face went pale. She turned the screen towards Alara. It was the front page of a major online tabloid. The headline screamed, Twy Coon's tirade. Julian Thorne evicts hysterical wife, Alara, from charity gala. The lead photo was a blurry, horrific shot of Julian. His face contorted in a snarl, his hand tangled in her hair as he dragged her through the foyer. But it was the accompanying article that was the real poison. Quoting anonymous sources from inside the event, it painted Alara as an unstable, jealous wife who had caused a drunken scene after misinterpreting a friendly conversation between her husband and a young colleague. It spun Julian's violence as a desperate attempt to calmly remove his overwrought wife from the situation to save her further embarrassment. Isabella's fingerprints were all over it. It was a PR masterpiece of character assassination. They're already controlling the narrative. Alara whispered the words like acid. They're making me the villain. Of course they are. Chloe spat, slamming the laptop shut. It's what they do. They crush, they spin, they destroy. But they've made one critical mistake. Alara looked up, her eyes red-rimmed and confused. What? Chloe knelt in front of her, taking her friend's trembling hands in her own. Her eyes, usually so cynical and world-weary from her job, now burned with a fire Alara hadn't seen in years. They underestimated you, Chloe said, her voice low and intense. Julian, that crimson-clad viper, the whole world, they all think you're just a pretty fragile doll that he can break and throw away. She paused, her grip tightening. But I know who you were before him. Alara Sterling, the smartest woman in our program. The one who could outdesign, outthink, and outwork everyone. She's still in there. He didn't destroy her. He just buried her. A tiny spark flickered in the desolate landscape of Alara's heart. He thinks this is over. Chloe continued, her voice rising with conviction. He thinks he won tonight. But this isn't the end, Alara. This is the beginning. We're not going to sue him for alimony. We're not going to fight for a settlement. That's his game played on his field. We're going to do something else. What? Alara breathed. We are going to take everything, Chloe said, a dangerous smile playing on her lips. His company, his reputation, His legacy. We are going to find every skeleton in his closet, every dirty deal, every secret he's ever buried, and we're going to burn his entire empire to the ground. He dragged you out by your hair. We're going to drag him down by his crown. This is not about revenge. This is about justice. For the first time since she'd felt Julian's hand in her hair, Elara felt something other than pain and humiliation. It was a faint, unfamiliar flicker. It was hope. It was rage, and it was the first stone being laid in the foundation of a war. The days that followed were a blur of legal jargon, bitter coffee, and sleepless nights on Chloe's couch. The world outside raged with the story. Julian's PR machine, captained by Isabella, was working in overdrive. Elara was painted in the society columns as a tragic, unstable figure, while Julian was the long-suffering husband, a pillar of strength dealing with a private family matter. They even floated a narrative about her having a breakdown due to the pressures of public life. It was masterful, and it was suffocating. They're building a cage of lies around you, Chloe said, scrolling through another saccharine article praising Julian's forbearance. We need to break out, and for that, we need a bigger hammer. Chloe's connections as a journalist led them to Ava Chen, a lawyer whose name was whispered with a mixture of fear and reverence in corporate circles. Ava wasn't a divorce lawyer. She was a corporate litigator, a specialist in shareholder lawsuits and hostile takeovers. Her office was a minimalist expanse of glass and steel overlooking the financial district, a war room disguised as a workspace. Ava Chen was a woman in her late 40s with an impeccably tailored suit and hair pulled back so tightly it seemed to brook no argument. She listened to Elara's story without interruption, her steepled fingers resting on a polished mahogany desk, her eyes sharp and analytical. She had already reviewed the prenuptial agreement which Chloe had managed to procure from Elara's old files. This is a fortress, Ava said, her voice calm and even, tapping a perfectly manicured finger on the document. Julian's father had this drafted. It waives your right to any assets of Thorn Industries, any properties acquired before or during the marriage, and limits spousal support to a pittance contingent on a non-disclosure agreement. It's designed to ensure that a departing spouse leaves with nothing more than what they came in with. Elara's heart sank. So it's hopeless. I didn't say that, Ava corrected, a ghost of a smile touching her lips. I said it was a fortress, and every fortress has a weakness. Usually, it's the arrogance of its architect. She leaned forward. The prenup is voidable under conditions of duress or fraud, but a more potent avenue is to argue that you weren't just a wife. For 10 years, you put your own promising career on hold to become a full-time, unpaid ambassador for the Thorn brand. You hosted diplomats, charmed investors, planned events that directly led to major business deals. You weren't just a spouse, you were a strategic asset. We can argue that a significant portion of the company's growth in the last decade is tied to your unpaid emotional and social labor. We will sue for equity. It was a bold, unconventional strategy, not for a piece of his fortune, but for a piece of his company. But more importantly, Ava continued, a messy public lawsuit is the last thing Julian Thorn wants right now. And Chloe tells me, you suspect he has secrets. Elara nodded slowly. He was always secretive about the company's finances. There were trips to the Cayman Islands he claimed were for investor relations. And there was a project he was obsessed with a few years ago. The Odessa project. He sank hundreds of millions into it, something about securing new shipping routes in the Black Sea. Then it just vanished. He never spoke of it again, and I heard rumors that it was a catastrophic failure. Chloe leaned in her journalistic instincts, flaring. $100 million failure that was never reported to the shareholders. That's not just bad business. That's potential securities fraud. Exactly, Ava said. This is where we start. Chloe, you're the investigator. Dig into the Odessa project. Find out what happened, who was involved, where the money went. Elara. Your job is harder. You have to remember everything. Every name he mentioned in his sleep, every document you saw on his desk, every hushed phone call you overheard. Your memory is our treasure map. For the next few weeks, Chloe's apartment transformed into a command center. Elara, fueled by a purpose she hadn't felt in a decade, dredged up memories she had long since buried. She recalled the name of a disgruntled executive Julian had fired around the time of the Odessa project, a man named Robert Maxwell. She remembered Julian taking frantic calls from a Swiss banker named Luc Dubois. Each name was a breadcrumb. Chloe, using her research skills and a network of sources, vanished down the rabbit hole. She discovered that Robert Maxwell was now living in quiet retirement, bitter and willing to talk off the record. She found that Luc Dubois' bank had a reputation for handling discreet, high-risk transactions. The picture was still fuzzy, but the outline of something large and ugly was beginning to form. One evening, as Elara was meticulously cataloguing every social event she had hosted and cross-referencing them with Thorn Industries' stock performance, an encrypted email arrived in her inbox. The sender was anonymous. The subject line was a single word: Vanguard. Her blood ran cold. The Vanguard Gala. The night her life imploded. Hesitantly, she opened it. The message was brief. Julian Thorn is not the man you think he is, nor is he the man the board thinks he is. What he did to you was dishonorable. What he has done to the company your father helped build is a crime. Look into the shadow ledger for the Odessa project. Your father would have wanted you to know the truth. A friend of Charles Sterling. Elara stared at the screen, her heart pounding. Charles Sterling, her father. He had been a brilliant engineer who held a senior position at Thorn Industries back when Julian's father was in charge. He had helped innovate the logistics software that was still the backbone of the company. He had died of a heart attack when Elara was in college, but he had always spoken of the Thorns with respect, seeing them as titans of industry. That this friend of her father's was on the board, it was a stunning revelation. There was a secret ally, someone on the inside, watching. Chloe Ava. She called out, her voice trembling. They crowded around the laptop. Ava read the email, her expression unreadable but intense. A shadow ledger, Ava mused. That means they were cooking the books. The Odessa project wasn't just a failure he buried. He likely used it as a cover to move money to hide losses or to pay people off. This is the key. If we can find that ledger, we don't just have leverage for a divorce settlement. We have the weapon that can bring him down in his own boardroom. But who is it? Chloe asked. Who is this friend? Elara's mind raced through the faces from the galas, the holiday parties, the weekend retreats, the older stoic members of the board. And then one face came into focus. Alistair Finch. A quiet, dignified man in his 70s, Alistair had been her father's closest colleague. He always greeted her with a sad, knowing smile, as if he saw her father's ghost standing behind her. At the Vanguard Gala just before the end, she had caught his eye. He hadn't been watching the spectacle with horror or pity, but with a look of cold, grim confirmation. "I think I know," Elara said, a newfound strength resonating in her voice. The sword was no longer just an idea. It was being forged in the fires of memory, secrets, and a hidden alliance. And Elara was beginning to feel its weight in her hand. She was no longer a victim fleeing a tyrant. She was a warrior preparing for battle. With the anonymous email as their Rosetta Stone, the investigation accelerated. The name Alistair Finch was a guarded secret between Elara, Chloe, and Ava. They knew he wouldn't risk direct contact again unless it was absolutely critical. His message was clear. He had pointed them to the weapon, but they had to find it and wield it themselves. Chloe, working her sources, discovered that the disgruntled ex-executive Robert Maxwell had been the CFO on the Odessa project before he was abruptly retired. After a series of cautious off-the-record meetings in quiet coffee shops, Chloe's persistence wore him down. Maxwell, a man broken by Julian's ruthlessness, finally agreed to talk. He spoke of a project doomed from the start, a series of bribes to foreign officials, shell corporations set up in Panama, and massive unrecorded consulting fees paid to ghost companies. The project's official failure was a cover story. In reality, Julian had used it as a personal slush fund, siphoning off over $200 million to cover massive personal trading losses he'd incurred, and to fund his extravagant lifestyle, including the purchase of a private jet and a villa in St. Bart's, both of which he'd claimed were corporate assets. He called it creative accounting, Maxwell said, stirring his coffee with a trembling hand. I called it grand larceny. When I threatened to go to the board, he ruined me. He manufactured a performance review, accused me of incompetence, and threatened to blacklist me from the entire industry. I had a family, a mortgage. I signed the NDA and walked away. Maxwell didn't have the shadow ledger itself, but he knew how it worked. It was a completely separate set of books, maintained digitally on a highly encrypted air-gapped server in the company's Swiss data center. The only person with direct access was Julian's notoriously loyal CIO, a man named Gregory Finch, no relation to Alistair. It's a digital fortress, Chloe reported back to the war room. Getting to it is impossible without an inside man. Then we won't go through the front door, Ava declared. We'll create a crack in the wall and let the light in. Ava's strategy was twofold. Phase 1 was to apply public pressure. She drafted a legal filing. It wasn't a quiet request for divorce. It was a bombshell lawsuit. It sued not just for divorce, but for a 20% equity stake in Thorn Industries, citing Elara's decade of foundational unpaid labor that directly contributed to the company's brand value and market growth. It also formally alleged extreme emotional distress and public assault. The moment the suit was filed, it was a declaration of war. The story of the hysterical wife was immediately challenged. Elara, who had been in hiding, agreed to one carefully controlled interview with a respected, hard-hitting journalist that Chloe knew. In the interview, Elara was not the fragile, broken woman the world expected. She was composed, articulate, and strong. She didn't sling mud. She simply told her truth calmly and factually. She spoke of her architectural dreams, the subtle ways her career was sidelined, and the escalating isolation of her life. When asked about the night of the gala, she didn't cry. She looked directly into the camera. What happened that night was the culmination of years of private control and emotional abuse, she said, her voice steady. The only difference was that it happened in public. I am not a victim. I am a survivor of a toxic marriage, and I am fighting to reclaim my life and my contribution to the empire I helped build." The interview was a stunning success. Public opinion, once swayed by Julian's PR, began to shift. The hashtag, Judge I Stand With Alara, began to trend. Women's advocacy groups issued statements of support. Suddenly, Julian wasn't a long-suffering husband. He was a public abuser. The cracks in his throne began to show. Sponsors of the Vanguard Foundation started to ask questions. The company's stock took a small but noticeable dip. Julian was furious. He was used to controlling the narrative, and for the first time he had lost it. Meanwhile, Isabella was not enjoying her victory. The life she had envisioned of being the glamorous, powerful new Mrs. Thorne was being tarnished. She was now publicly seen as the other woman in a sordid abuse scandal. Society hostesses who once courted her now gave her the cold shoulder. The dream was souring, and she began to put more and more pressure on Julian. "You need to fix this," she'd shriek at him during frantic phone calls, which were gleefully reported by tabloid sources. "You promised me a kingdom, not a dumpster fire." Her panic made her reckless. Julian, under pressure from all sides, became paranoid and volatile. He started lashing out at his staff, second-guessing his executives. The atmosphere at Thorne Industries grew toxic. This was phase 2 of Ava's plan, sow internal chaos. Chloe, using Maxwell's information, crafted an anonymous, highly detailed tip and leaked it to a bulldog financial reporter at the Wall Street Sentinel, known for his tenacity. The tip didn't mention the shadow ledger, but it raised specific, pointed questions about the astronomical and unexplained losses of the Odessa project, and hinted at shareholder deception. The article that followed was an earthquake. It didn't make outright accusations, but it asked enough of the right questions to spook the market. Thorne Industries Black Sea. Black hole, the headline read. The stock dropped 5% in a single day. The board of directors, who had previously been content to let Julian handle his domestic issues, were now panicking. They called an emergency meeting. Julian was trapped. He had to reassure the board, but he couldn't reveal the truth. He was forced to lie, to obfuscate, to create a web of complex falsehoods to explain the missing funds. He blamed Maxwell. He blamed rogue contractors. He blamed geopolitical instability. It was during this time of intense pressure that Alistair Finch made his move. He knew Julian would be distracted his focus on the board and the stock price. Finch, leveraging his decades of trust and seniority, approached Gregory Finch, the CIO. He didn't accuse me. He expressed concern. He spoke about loyalty to the company, to the shareholders, and to the legacy of Julian's father. He subtly hinted that the ship was taking on water, and that every man needed to decide if he was going down with the captain. He didn't ask for the ledger. He just planted a seed of doubt in the mind of the one man who held the key. A day after the board meeting, a plain manila envelope was delivered by courier to Ava Chen's office. There was no return address. Inside was a single encrypted USB drive. Ava plugged it into a secure offline laptop. She typed in the password Alistair had sent in a second, separate encrypted message, Charles, Sterling, 1958. A spreadsheet bloomed on the screen. It was the shadow ledger, a meticulous, damning record of every illegal transaction, every bribe, every siphoned dollar. It detailed how Julian had defrauded his own company of nearly $250 million. Ava Chen looked up from the screen, a grim, triumphant smile on her face. "We've got it," she said to Alara and Chloe. "The sword is not only forged, it's razor-sharp." The time for quiet maneuvering was over. The time for the final confrontation had arrived. Ava immediately began drafting a letter, not to Julian, but to each member of the Thorn Industries Board of Directors, calling for a special session to present evidence of gross financial misconduct by the CEO. The coup was about to begin. The Thorn Industries boardroom was on the 80th floor, a glass-walled chamber that offered a godlike view of the city below. It was a room built for power, with a long obsidian table, polished to a mirror shine, and 20 high-backed leather chairs. It was Julian's sanctuary, his throne room. And today it was to be his gallows. Julian entered the room with a confident stride, but the strain was visible around his eyes. He believed this emergency meeting, called by Ava Chen on behalf of a major stakeholder, was a desperate legal maneuver by Elara, a gambit to pressure him into a larger divorce settlement. He was prepared to swat it away like a fly. He nodded curtly to the board members, his gaze lingering for a second on Alistair Finch, who met his look with an unreadable, placid expression. "Let's get this farce over with," Julian announced, taking his seat at the head of the table. "I assume Ms. Chen has some trumped-up claims to waste our time with." The door opened, and Ava Chen walked in, followed by Chloe. But it was the third person who made the entire room draw a collective breath. Elara. This was not the society wife they knew. She wore a simple, elegant, dark grey sheath dress. Her hair was pulled back in a severe professional bun. The only piece of jewelry she wore was a simple gold necklace her father had given her for her 16th birthday. Gone was the timid, accommodating Mrs. Thorn. In her place stood Elara Sterling, a woman radiating a cold, focused calm that was more intimidating than any outburst. She took a seat opposite Julian, her eyes locking with him across the polished table. The flicker of shock in his eyes was her first small victory. He hadn't expected her to have the audacity to face him here in his domain. "Mr. Thorn, members of the board," Ava began, her voice crisp and clear. "We are not here to discuss a domestic dispute. We are here to discuss a matter of fiduciary duty and gross corporate malfeasance." Julian scoffed. "This is a pathetic attempt to extort money. Whatever fantasy my soon-to-be ex-wife has cooked up." "This is no fantasy, Julian," Elara said, her voice cutting through his. It was the first time she had spoken, and the sound of it, clear, strong, and devoid of fear, silenced him. Every head in the room turned to her. "For 10 years," she continued, her gaze sweeping over the faces of the board members, many of whom she had hosted in her home. "I stood by this man. I helped him build the image of Thorn Industries as a stable, respectable, family-led institution. An image I have now learned that is built on a foundation of lies." Ava Chen nodded to Chloe, who placed a sleek tablet on the table and with a few taps activated the boardroom's main screen. The shadow ledger appeared line by damning line. "What you are looking at," Ava said, "is a detailed record of the Odessa project, a project that was not a business failure, but a meticulously planned $240 million fraud perpetrated by your CEO to cover personal debts and fund a lifestyle you were told was paid for by his personal wealth." Julian's face went from ruddy to ashen. He stared at the screen, his mouth slightly agape. He looked at Alistair Finch, who simply stared back his disappointment, a palpable force in the room. He had been betrayed from the inside. "This is fabricated," Julian sputtered, slamming his fist on the table. "This is a forged document, created by a bitter, vengeful woman." "Is it?" Ava countered smoothly. "Then perhaps you can explain the wire transfers to shell corporations in Panama that match to the dollar the purchase of your villa in St. Bart's, or the payments to consultants who are in fact art dealers from whom you purchased several pieces of your private collection." We have the receipts, Mr. Thorne. We have the bank records. We have sworn testimony from your former CFO, Robert Maxwell. The board members murmured amongst themselves, their expressions shifting from skepticism to alarm. They were businessmen. They understood numbers, and the numbers on the screen told a story of catastrophic betrayal. Elara spoke again, her voice resonating with the quiet authority of truth. This isn't just about money. It's about the soul of this company. My father, Charles Sterling, helped build the software that is the heart of this empire. He believed in integrity. He believed in the Thorne name. Julian has spat on that legacy. He has risked this entire company, your company, to fuel his own greed. She then looked directly at Julian, her eyes holding no hatred, only a profound and final judgment. You thought I was just an accessory, something you could own and then discard. You tried to break me, to humiliate me, to silence me. But you forgot that I lived in your house for 10 years. I saw the late-night papers you tried to hide. I heard the hushed phone calls. I saw the fear in your eyes when the market turned. You didn't just underestimate me, Julian. You forgot I was even there. It was a fatal oversight. Alistair Finch cleared his throat, and the room fell silent. I have seen the evidence presented by Ms. Chen and Ms. Sterling, he said, his voice heavy with gravitas. I have also conducted my own internal review. The allegations are not only credible, they are undeniable. Julian Thorne has systematically defrauded this company and its shareholders. He has cancer in this boardroom. I move for a vote of no confidence and his immediate termination for cause. Another board member seconded the motion immediately. Julian looked around the table, his eyes wide with panic, searching for an ally. He found none. He saw only the cold, hard faces of businessmen cutting their losses. The vote was a formality. Unanimous. This is preposterous. You can't do this, Julian roared, rising to his feet. I am Thorne Industries. No, Alistair said, his voice like a chipping stone. You are not. You are a disgrace to your father's name. Security will see you out. You are to have no further access to this building or any company assets. 2 security guards entered the room, their presence prearranged. They stood on either side of Julian. The color drained from his face as he realized the finality of it all. His empire, his power, his identity all gone in the space of 15 minutes. As the guards escorted a stunned, sputtering Julian Thorne from the room, he passed by Elara. He stopped for a moment, his face a mask of disbelief and pure hatred. You, he whispered venomously. You did this. Elara met his gaze without flinching. No, Julian, she said, her voice quiet but unshakable. You did this to yourself. You just thought no one was watching. He was escorted out. The door clicked shut, leaving a stunned silence in its wake. The reckoning was over. Elara Sterling had not just won her freedom, she had taken the throne. In the aftermath of the boardroom coup, the fallout was swift and spectacular. Julian Thorne's world imploded. Facing an SEC investigation and criminal fraud charges, his empire was dismantled, and his name became a synonym for corporate disgrace. The man who once commanded rooms with his presence was reduced to a grim-faced figure on the courthouse steps. Isabella Vance, whose ambition had been her driving force, vanished entirely. With Julian's assets frozen and her reputation destroyed, she disappeared from the social scene, a ghost of the life she had so desperately craved. But this story was never truly about their downfall. It was about Ilara's rise. As part of a confidential settlement, Ilara secured the 20% equity stake she had fought for. She didn't stay to rule over the rubble of Julian's empire. Instead, she systematically sold her shares and used the immense capital to create the Sterling Foundation, a charity dedicated to funding scholarships for women in architecture. She had won her freedom, and she was now using it to build doors for others. Leaving New York behind, she returned to her roots on the West Coast, settling in a quiet town overlooking the Pacific. There she finally built a house for herself, not a cold mansion of marble and expectation, but a warm, light-filled structure of wood and glass that embraced the rugged landscape. She opened a small but acclaimed architectural firm, Sterling and Associates, focusing on the sustainable community projects she had once dreamed of. She was no longer Ilara Thorne, the tycoon's wife. She was Ilara Sterling, the architect. Years later, standing on the deck of the house she built, she watched the sunset with Chloe. "Do you ever think about him?" Chloe asked gently. Ilara smiled, a look of profound peace on her face. "I think of him as a lesson," she said. "A story about a man so obsessed with power, he built his own cage. But that story is over. This is my story now." The wind from the ocean caught her hair, and she didn't shield her face. The phoenix had not only risen from the ashes, she had learned to command the wind. Ilara's story is a powerful reminder that the most gilded cages are still cages. It's a story about the brutal reality of hidden abuse and the terrifying power of public humiliation. But more than that, it's a story of incredible resilience. It shows that your lowest moment, the moment you feel most broken and exposed, does not have to be your ending. It can be the beginning of a battle you never knew you had the strength to fight. It proves that true power isn't about wealth or status. It's about reclaiming your own voice, your own name, and your own truth. Have you ever felt underestimated or silenced? Have you witnessed someone being judged unfairly by the court of public opinion? If Ilara's journey from a discarded wife to the architect of her own destiny resonated with you, please hit that like button to show your support. Share this video with someone who might need to hear a story of strength and survival. And don't forget to subscribe and ring the notification bell so you won't miss our next real-life drama. Your story matters. Let us know your thoughts in the comments below. A receipt. That's all it took. A single crisp piece of paper that unraveled a life woven from threads of love, luxury, and lies. For Catherine Rutherford, 7 months pregnant and nestled in the heart of a billion-dollar empire, that receipt wasn't just for a car, it was a death certificate for her marriage. This isn't just a story about cheating. It's a story of devastating betrayal of a woman pushed to the edge and the cold, calculated revenge she served to the man who thought he owned the world. Stay with us as we uncover how one woman's discovery brought a titan to his knees. The silence in the Rutherford penthouse was a specific kind of quiet, the sort that costs a fortune to create. It was a silence engineered by triple-paned, floor-to-ceiling windows that muted the roar of downtown Austin, a silence that hummed with the barely audible thrum of a climate control system, maintaining a perfect 72 degrees. For Catherine Vance Rutherford, this silence had once been a comfort, a serene backdrop to a life that had exceeded every dream. Now, it was suffocating. At 34, Catherine was the very picture of poised elegance. An architect by training, with a mind as sharp as the clean lines of the buildings she once designed, she had paused her career to embrace a different kind of creation. At 7 months pregnant, her body was a beautiful, burgeoning vessel of life, a constant, gentle reminder of the future she and her husband, Damien Rutherford, were building together. Damien. The name itself carried weight in the city. He was the charismatic wunderkind CEO of Helios Dynamics, a tech firm that had revolutionized renewable energy storage. He was a visionary, a deal maker, a man who moved through the world with the unshakable confidence of someone who had never been told no. He was handsome, doting, and until this morning, the center of Catherine's universe. Their life was a meticulously curated masterpiece. A sprawling penthouse overlooking Ladybird Lake, a weekend home in the hill country, a private jet on standby. They were a power couple, their faces gracing the society pages, their philanthropy a topic of conversation at every gala. Damien had given her everything: security, passion, a world dipped in gold, and she had given him her trust, absolute and unconditional. The day had started like any other. Damien had left before dawn, a quick kiss to her forehead and a murmured big meeting with the board. Catherine had her morning routine prenatal yoga, a healthy breakfast prepared by their personal chef, and then a few hours in the nursery arranging and rearranging tiny clothes, her heart swelling with anticipation. The baby, a boy they had already named Julian, was a soft, fluttering presence within her, a secret conversation between mother and child. It was during her mid-morning tea that the silence began to feel sinister. She'd been scrolling through shared family photos on the master suite's integrated wall tablet, a sleek black screen that controlled everything from the lights to the security. She was looking for a photo from their baby moon in Santorini when she swiped past the photo gallery and into the shared document folder. It was mostly boring things: household invoices, travel itineraries, appliance warranties. But one file, synced from Damien's laptop just this morning, caught her eye. It wasn't the title that was alarming, but its starkness: Vehicle Purchase Agreement Austin Imports.pdf. Curiosity, innocent at first, pricked at her. Had Damien bought a new car? He hadn't mentioned it. He had a fleet of them already gleaming in their subterranean garage, a matte black Mercedes G-Wagon for him, a silver Tesla Model X for her, and a vintage Porsche 911 for his weekend follies. Another car seemed excessive. She tapped the file. It loaded with a crisp digital snap. Her eyes scanned the familiar letterhead of Austin's most exclusive luxury car dealership. The buyer's name was listed clearly: Damien L. Rutherford. Then her eyes fell to the vehicle description, and the first crack appeared in the foundation of her world. Model Maserati Ghibli SQ4, Gran Lusso. Exterior color Rosso Magma. Interior Nero, Pieno Fiore, natural leather, with Rosso stitching, Rosso Magma, molten red, a flashy, screaming look-at-me color. It was the absolute antithesis of Damien's usual taste, which ran towards sophisticated grays and deep presidential blues. This was a car for a different kind of person, a different kind of life. A cold knot tightened in Catherine's stomach. It was just a car. She was being silly. Hormonal Damien would probably say with a gentle, patronizing smile. But she couldn't shake the feeling of wrongness. She scrolled further down, past the VIN, the options packages, the litany of fees. And then she saw it. The section that made the air leave her lungs in a painful gasp. Registered keeper information. Name: Ms. Isabella Rossi. Address: 4800 Riverway Drive, Unit 22B, Austin, TX, 787 Isabella Rossi. The name was a ghost, a whisper she'd heard before, but dismissed. A new associate at one of the venture capital firms Helios worked with. Damien had mentioned her innocently. Brilliant, a real shark, he'd said. Catherine had seen her once across a crowded room at a charity auction, a stunningly beautiful woman with a cascade of dark hair and a smile that could charm a snake. 4800 Riverway Drive. Catherine's hands trembled as she pulled up a new search window on the tablet. She knew the address. It was a new, obscenely luxurious, high-rise condominium complex, the kind of place that catered to single wealthy professionals, the kind of place that had a rooftop infinity pool and a 24-hour concierge. Her mind raced, connecting dots she hadn't even known existed. The late nights Damien had blamed on server crashes, the sudden unexplained business trips to New York that yielded no public announcements, the faint, unfamiliar scent of perfume on his suit jacket a few weeks ago, a floral note she'd mistaken for a colleague's at a dinner party. It all coalesced into a single, hideous image Damien. Her Damien buying a blood-red Maserati for this other woman. A gift, a trophy, a key to a life that ran parallel to theirs, hidden in the shadows. The purchase price was listed at the bottom of the page, a number that made her feel sick. 450. Paid in full. $118,000. Enough for a down payment on a house, enough to fund a child's entire college education, spent on a toy for his mistress. The silence of the penthouse was no longer serene. It was the vacuum of space, cold and airless. The gentle flutter in her womb suddenly felt like a panicked bird trapped in a cage. This wasn't just about her anymore. This was about Julian. What kind of world was she bringing her son into? A world built on a foundation of lies, a legacy of deceit. Her first instinct was to scream, to shatter the expensive silence with a howl of rage and pain, to call Damien and demand an explanation, to hear him stammer and lie his way through it. But Catherine was an architect. She didn't demolish a building by swinging a random sledgehammer. She examined the blueprints, identified the structural weaknesses, and planned the demolition with cold, calculated precision. The rage was there, a white-hot fire in her chest. But beneath it, something else was crystallizing. A steely resolve. She would not be the weeping, hysterical wife. She would not be a victim in her own story. Damien had mistaken her gentleness for weakness. He had underestimated her. It was a mistake he was going to regret for the rest of his life. She stood up, her movements calm and deliberate. She walked from the master suite through the cavernous living room with its museum-quality art and into her home office. The room was her sanctuary, a space of order and logic, its walls lined with books on structural engineering and design theory. She sat at her sleek, minimalist desk and picked up her phone. Her hands were perfectly steady now. She didn't scroll to her husband's name. She didn't call her mother or her best friend. She opened a new search, her fingers tapping out a query with chilling purpose. Best divorce attorney in Austin. High-asset cases. A name appeared at the top of the list, accompanied by a string of accolades and 5-star reviews. Jasmine Kaur and Associates Law. The firm's tagline read, Strategic advocacy, uncompromising integrity. Catherine looked at the photo of the lawyer. Jasmine Kaur had dark, intelligent eyes and a gaze that promised no nonsense. She looked like a woman who knew how to dismantle an empire. Catherine pressed the call button. The phone rang once, twice. Core and Associates. How may I help you? A crisp, professional voice answered. Catherine took a deep, steadying breath. The sound of her own voice was alien to her, devoid of the warmth it usually held. It was the voice of a woman who had just drawn a battle line. "Yes," she said, her tone as cold and hard as polished marble. "I need to schedule an immediate consultation with Miss Core. My name is Catherine Rutherford, and I believe my husband is about to learn the true meaning of the word liability." The offices of Core and Associates were located in a sleek, modern tower that felt a world away from the opulent warmth of Catherine's penthouse. The aesthetic was minimalist and sharp, concrete floors, glass walls, and stark black leather furniture. It was a space designed for clarity, not comfort. It was a war room. Jasmine Core was even more formidable in person. Dressed in a razor-sharp charcoal suit, she carried herself with an air of contained energy like a panther at rest. Her office overlooked the state capital, a view that spoke of power and influence. She didn't waste time with pleasantries. "Mrs. Rutherford, Catherine," she began, her voice calm but commanding as she gestured for Catherine to sit. "Your call was direct. Tell me everything. Start from the beginning and do not leave out a single detail, no matter how small or seemingly insignificant." Catherine, numb and operating on pure adrenaline, laid it all out. She spoke of her marriage, the shared dreams, the pregnancy. Her voice was even almost detached as she recounted finding the purchase agreement. She slid a printed copy across the polished mahogany desk. Jasmine picked it up, her eyes scanning the document with an unnerving speed. She lingered on the name Isabella Rossi and the paid-in-full stamp. Her expression remained neutral, but a flicker of something interest calculation danced in her dark eyes. "A Maserati," Jasmine murmured, placing the paper down. "Men are rarely subtle in their betrayals. They think with their egos, which makes them predictable." She leaned forward, her focus entirely on Catherine. "The car is the tip of the iceberg. I can guarantee you that. Our first step is to see the rest of the iceberg without letting him know we're looking." For the next 2 hours, Jasmine outlined the strategy. It was a masterclass in modern warfare, fought not with armies, but with subpoenas, forensic accountants, and private investigators. "You will go home, and you will act ipu, as if nothing has happened," Jasmine instructed, her tone leaving no room for argument. "You are the happy, glowing, expectant mother. You will be loving, you will be supportive. You will give him no reason to suspect that the ground beneath his feet is about to crumble. Your emotional control is our most powerful weapon right now." "Can you do that?" Catherine thought of her baby of the future she was now fighting for. "Yes," she said, the word tasting like metal in her mouth. "Good." Jasmine nodded, a hint of approval in her voice. "Because while you are playing the part of the devoted wife, my team will be moving. We'll file the petition for divorce silently. We'll get a temporary restraining order on all marital assets effective the moment he is served. By the time he finds out what's happening, he'll be locked out of moving, selling, or hiding a single dollar." The plan was brutal and efficient. Jasmine's team would consist of a forensic accountant named Marcus Thorne, a man she described as a bloodhound for numbers, and a private investigator, a former FBI agent named David Chen. Their mission was to build an irrefutable case of infidelity and, more importantly, dissipation of marital assets. The 118-ton at 450 for the Maserati was just the beginning. Jasmine was certain there was more. Catherine walked out of the law office, feeling hollowed out, and yet paradoxically filled with a grim sense of purpose. The role of a lifetime awaited her. That evening, when Damien came home, the performance began. He breezed in, smelling of expensive cologne, and the crisp night air, a wide smile on his handsome face. "Ellie, my love," he boomed, dropping his briefcase and enveloping her in a hug. She had to fight every instinct to recoil. She forced herself to relax into his embrace, to inhale his scent without flinching. She tilted her head up for his kiss, a practiced gesture of affection that now felt like a venomous bite. "How was the board meeting, darling?" she asked, her voice a perfect imitation of wifely concern. "A triumph," he declared, pulling away to look down at her belly. He placed a hand on it, a gesture of paternal pride that now seemed grotesquely theatrical. "We secured another round of funding that will make your head spin. Julian is going to have the world at his feet." The irony was so thick she could have choked on it. He spoke of their son's future while actively sabotaging it. The rage simmered, but she pushed it down, channeling Jasmine's instructions. "Emotional control is our weapon." The next 2 weeks were a special kind of hell. Catherine lived a double life, a spy in her own home. By day, she received encrypted updates from Jasmine's team. By night, she played her part, attending galas on Damien's arm, smiling for cameras discussing nursery color schemes, and enduring his touch. Each kiss was a betrayal, each "I love you," a lie that echoed in the silent penthouse. Meanwhile, Marcus Thorne, the forensic accountant, was unearthing a tangled web of deceit. He had gained access to years of credit card statements and bank records. The findings were staggering. It wasn't just a car. There was a lease on the luxury condominium at 4800 Riverway Drive, paid for 6 months in advance, from a private account Catherine never knew existed. There were charges from Cartier for a diamond tennis bracelet she had never seen, receipts from exclusive restaurants for intimate dinners for 2, first-class flights to New York Aspen, even a weekend trip to Paris, all booked for Mr. Damien Rutherford and Ms. Isabella Rossi. Damien wasn't just having an affair. He was funding a complete parallel life. The total dissipation of assets Marcus had tracked so far was approaching $500,000. Each discovery was another stab wound, but Catherine absorbed the pain and filed it away as ammunition. The private investigator David Chen provided the visual confirmation. He sent a secure file to Catherine's phone. With trembling hands, she opened it. The photos were grainy, taken from a distance, but unmistakable. Damien and Isabella laughing as they got into the Rosso Magma Maserati. Damien, his arm wrapped possessively around her waist as they entered the condominium building. A picture of them kissing on a park bench, backlit by the setting sun. A picture of such casual intimacy that it shattered what was left of Catherine's heart. She stared at the photos, the face of her husband twisted in affection for another woman. The betrayal was no longer an abstract concept, a name on a piece of paper. It was real. It was visceral. Jasmine called a meeting. "We have enough," she said, her voice tight with satisfaction. "We have the affair. We have the dissipation of assets. We can move now. We'll have him served at his office tomorrow morning." The day of the serving was the longest of Catherine's life. She stayed home, her phone clutched in her hand, waiting. At 10:05 a.m., she received a simple text from Jasmine. "Done." The explosion was immediate. Her phone rang Damien's name, flashing on the screen. She ignored it. It rang again, and again. Then came the barrage of texts, each more frantic than the last. "Ellie, call me now. There's been a horrible mistake. My accounts are frozen. What is going on?" "This is insane. You can't be serious." "A divorce. Is this about the car?" "I can explain everything. Don't do this, Catherine." She read the messages, a cold satisfaction washing over her. The predictable path of a narcissist caught in a lie-denial confusion, feigned innocence, and finally an attempt at explanation. He came home that evening like a hurricane. He burst through the door, his face a mask of fury, his charisma gone, replaced by a raw, ugly rage. "Catherine!" he roared, his voice bouncing off the marble floors. She was waiting for him in the living room, sitting calmly on the white sofa, a glass of water in her hand. She looked at him, her expression unreadable. "What the hell is this?" he demanded, waving a sheaf of legal papers in his hand. "A restraining order. You froze our assets. Are you out of your mind?" "Our assets," she replied, her voice dangerously quiet. "You mean the assets you've been so generously spending on Isabella Rossi?" His face went pale. The blustering anger deflated, replaced by a flicker of panic. He fell back on his most trusted tactic, gaslighting. "Isabella is a business colleague," he stammered, his eyes darting around the room, unable to meet hers. "The car was a company vehicle, a bonus for a major deal she helped close. You're pregnant, Ellie. Your hormones are making you paranoid. You're blowing this completely out of proportion." Catherine almost laughed. It was a pathetic textbook defense. She slowly stood up, her pregnant belly, a shield between them. "A company vehicle registered in her name, paid for, from a secret account," she asked, her voice rising with each question. "And the apartment, Damien? Is that a company condo? The Cartier bracelet, the trips to Paris, were those all business expenses too?" The blood drained from his face. He finally understood. She didn't just suspect. She knew. "Catherine, listen to me," he said, his voice dropping, attempting a tone of placating reason. "We can work this out. Don't throw away everything we have. Think about Julian." "Oh, I am thinking about Julian." She shot back the fire she had suppressed for weeks, finally igniting. "I'm thinking about what kind of man I want him to look up to. And it's not a liar. It's not a cheat. And it's certainly not a coward who builds his empire on deceit and thinks a woman's love is something he can just buy and sell." She walked past him towards her office. "You will speak to my lawyer from now on," she said, her voice ringing with finality. "My real lawyer, not the sycophants on your payroll who told you this was a good idea. Get your things. You have 1 hour to leave my home." He stood there, stunned into silence, the legal papers hanging limply from his hand. The great Damien Rutherford, the visionary, the titan of industry, looked small and utterly defeated in the vast, silent penthouse he thought he owned. The war had begun, and Catherine Rutherford had just won the first decisive battle. But she knew, with a chilling certainty, that the fight for her future was far from over. Damien would not go down this easily. Isabella Rossi lived her life in a state of curated bliss. At 29, she had achieved a level of success and luxury that most people only dreamed of. Her apartment at the Riverway was a sanctuary of modern design with breathtaking views of the Austin skyline. Her closet was filled with designer clothes, her refrigerator with champagne, and her garage housed a brand-new magma-red Maserati that purred like a jungle cat. She owed it all to Damien Rutherford. To Isabella, Damien wasn't a villain, he was her savior. She had been an ambitious but struggling associate at a cutthroat venture capital firm when they met. He had seen her potential, her fire. He'd mentored her, championed her, and eventually seduced her. He had painted a tragic picture of his marriage. It was a sham, he'd told her, a business arrangement with a woman who was cold, emotionally distant, and career-obsessed. He claimed they hadn't shared a bed in years and were only staying together for appearances to protect the carefully constructed image of Helios dynamics. "She doesn't understand me, Bella," he would say, his voice thick with manufactured sorrow as they lay in the bed he paid for. "Not like you do. You're the one I want to build a future with." Isabella, blinded by his charisma and the intoxicating lifestyle he offered, believed every word. She saw herself not as a mistress, but as the rightful queen-in-waiting. The Maserati wasn't a toy, it was a promise. The apartment wasn't a cage, it was their future home. She was in love, desperately and foolishly. Her perfect world shattered on a Tuesday afternoon. She was returning from a spa day feeling relaxed and radiant when she saw him. A man in a nondescript sedan parked across the street from her building, holding a long-lens camera. She felt a prickle of unease. Paparazzi. Had her relationship with Damien finally leaked? A part of her was thrilled by the idea. The next day, her world truly imploded. Her key fob to the building's private garage was declined. An error, she assumed. But when her key to the apartment itself also failed, a cold dread washed over her. The concierge, a man who usually greeted her with a fawning smile, looked at her with pity. "I'm sorry, Ms. Rossi," he said, avoiding her eyes. "There's an issue with the lease. You'll need to contact the owner of record." Frantic, she called Damien. It went straight to voicemail. She called again. Voicemail. She sent a flurry of panicked texts. No reply. This was unlike him. He always answered her calls. She was standing on the curb, her mind racing, when a black town car pulled up. The tinted rear window slid down, revealing a woman whose face she recognized from society blogs and magazine articles. It was Catherine Rutherford, the cold, distant wife. But the woman looking at her was not cold. Her gaze was like a laser beam, intense and analytical, and she was very, very pregnant. This was a detail Damien had conveniently omitted. "Isabella Rossi?" Catherine asked, her voice calm and even. There was no hint of hysteria, no sign of a woman scorned. This was far more terrifying. Isabella could only nod her throat, suddenly dry. "I think you and I need to talk," Catherine said. It wasn't a request. "Get in the car." Against her better judgment, Isabella complied, sliding into the cool leather interior. The car pulled away from the curb, a silent, moving bubble of tension. "What is this?" Isabella finally managed, her voice trembling slightly. "Where is Damien? Damien is currently dealing with the consequences of his actions," Catherine replied, her eyes fixed on Isabella. "As I'm afraid, are you? The lease on your apartment has been terminated. The title on your Maserati is being contested as a fraudulent transfer of a marital asset. The credit cards you've been using will be declined by the end of the hour." Isabella stared at her, horrified. "You can't do that." "I can, and I have," Catherine stated simply. "My husband, our husband, I suppose one could say, used marital funds to purchase your loyalty. That makes you a party to his fraud. I'm giving you a choice. You can be a witness or you can be a defendant. It's up to you." The carefully constructed fantasy Isabella had been living in crumbled into dust. The tragic, lonely husband, the loveless marriage, it was all a lie. She was not the queen-in-waiting. She was a casualty, a pawn in a rich man's game. Humiliation washed over her, hot and bitter. He told me you were separated." She whispered the words, tasting like ash. "He said you didn't want children." Catherine's mask of composure finally cracked. A flicker of genuine pain crossed her face, so raw and real that it stunned Isabella. "He said what?" And then the story spilled out of Isabella. Not just the lies about the marriage, but the promises for the future. the most damning of which made Catherine's blood run cold. He was setting up a trust. Isabella said, tears now streaming down her face. She was no longer a glamorous mistress, but a heartbroken, terrified young woman. A private one offshore. He said it was for us, for our future, for the children he wanted to have with me. Catherine felt the air get knocked out of her. This wasn't just infidelity. This wasn't just spending money. This was a calculated long-term plan to replace her, to erase her and the child she was carrying. He had been building a new dynasty while pretending to nurture the one they had. It was a level of sociopathic cruelty she could scarcely comprehend. The architect in her mind took over again, processing this new devastating piece of information, not as a wife, but as a strategist, an offshore trust. That was a whole new level of financial malfeasance. Catherine's demeanor shifted. The personal pain was packed away, replaced by the cold fury of a general who had just been handed the enemy's battle plans. "This trust," Catherine said, her voice sharp. "Do you have any documentation? An account number? A bank name? Anything at all?" Isabella. Desperate now to salvage anything from the wreckage of her life, nodded frantically. "He was careless. He left a file open on his tablet one night when he stayed over. I saw it. A bank in the Cayman Islands. A name. The Theseus Trust." The Theseus Trust. The name was a sick joke, a reference to the paradox of the ship that is replaced piece by piece until none of the original remains. That's what Damien intended to do to their family. Replace her, replace their child, and sail on as if nothing had changed. Catherine's driver was already pulling up to the curb a few blocks from the riverway. She looked at the woman beside her, a woman she should have hated, and felt a sliver of pity. They were both victims of the same man's boundless ego. "My lawyer will be in touch," Catherine said, her voice softer now, but no less firm. "She will grant you immunity from civil prosecution in exchange for a sworn affidavit and your full cooperation. Tell her everything, especially about the Theseus Trust." Isabella nodded, wiping her eyes. "What will happen to him?" Catherine looked out the window, her gaze distant and hard. "Damien built an empire. He seems to have forgotten that I am an architect. I know exactly where the load-bearing walls are, and I'm about to take them all out." The town car door opened. Isabella stumbled out onto the sidewalk, a ghost in her own life, left with nothing but the truth. As the car pulled away, Catherine placed a protective hand on her belly. The conversation with Isabella had been a gut punch, but it had also given her the ultimate weapon. This was no longer just a divorce. Damien hadn't just broken their vows, he had likely broken federal law. He had funneled marital and quite possibly corporate assets into an illegal offshore account to defraud his wife and child. She called Jasmine Core. "Jasmine," she said, her voice humming with a new, dangerous energy. "Change of plans. Marcus Thorne needs to stop looking at credit card bills and start looking for an offshore ghost. I have a name for him, the Theseus Trust. I think our high-asset divorce case is about to become a federal criminal investigation." The discovery of the Theseus Trust changed the entire landscape of the battle. The case escalated from a messy, albeit high-stakes divorce into something far more serious. Jasmine Core brought in a team of forensic accountants who specialized in international finance. The work was slow and painstaking, a delicate dance of legal requests and digital archaeology, peeling back layers of shell corporations and encrypted ledgers. While the accountants hunted for ghost money in the Caymans, Damien's legal team launched a counter-offensive. They were a pack of slick, expensive lawyers from a top corporate firm, and they came out swinging. They filed motions to have the asset freeze lifted, claiming it was causing irreparable harm to Helios Dynamics. They painted Catherine as a vindictive hormonal woman, manipulated by an aggressive lawyer, attempting to extort a settlement far beyond what she was due. Damien, barred from the penthouse, had taken up residence in a suite at the Four Seasons. He began a quiet but vicious smear campaign against Catherine. He told friends and business associates that she was mentally unstable, that the pregnancy had unhinged her. He was the victim, a loving husband blindsided by his wife's irrationality. Some people believed him. Invitations to social events dried up for Catherine. Former friends now offered her looks of pity or avoided her gaze altogether. The isolation was painful, but it only hardened her resolve. She spent her days in a self-imposed exile, surrounded by blueprints and legal documents. She pored over every piece of evidence. Jasmine's team uncovered her architect's mind, seeing patterns others might miss. The timelines of the offshore transfers, the creation of the trust, it all correlated with specific milestones in Helios Dynamics' growth. One rainy afternoon, as she was cross-referencing dates from the trust's formation with Damien's old calendars, a memory sparked. It was from the very beginning, before the penthouse, before the private jets, before Helios Dynamics was even a name. They had been living in a small rented bungalow near the university, both of them working insane hours. He was the brilliant engineer with a revolutionary idea for battery technology. She was a graduate student in architecture, but her passion for systems and efficiency extended beyond buildings. She remembered the nights spent at their kitchen table, covered in his complex equations and her structural diagrams. He would hit a wall with his energy transfer algorithms, and she, with her fresh perspective, would see a solution. She'd sketch out flowcharts, treating the energy transfer like a traffic system within a city, designing more efficient pathways. "You see things differently, Ellie," he used to say, his eyes wide with admiration. "You make the chaos make sense." Her contribution had been informal, the loving support of a partner. She never asked for credit. His success was their success. Or so she had thought. A sudden, chilling idea took root in her mind. She went to the back of a closet to a set of sealed storage boxes filled with her old university projects and notes. She hadn't looked at them in years. With trembling hands, she broke the tape on a box labeled Arch GRADP Projects and started digging. Beneath her thesis on sustainable urban design and rolls of old blueprints, she found it. A worn black moleskin notebook. Its pages were filled with her handwriting and diagrams from that specific period. And there, scrawled across a dozen pages, were the very same energy flow management schematics that she recognized as the core of Helios Dynamics' patented technology. There were dates on the pages, email printouts stapled to the inside cover, correspondence between her and Damien, where they discussed these exact concepts. She had designed the foundation, the foundational logic of his billion-dollar company, the very intellectual property upon which the entire empire was built, hadn't just been his idea. It had been theirs. She sank to the floor, the notebook clutched in her hands. The scope of his betrayal was staggering. He hadn't just cheated on her, lied to her, and tried to replace her. He had stolen the fruits of her intellect and built his kingdom on them, leaving her name off every patent, every document, every chapter of the story. He had erased her from her own creation. This changed everything. This wasn't just about her right to half of the marital assets. This was about her right to a foundational stake in the company itself. When she called Jasmine Core, her voice was eerily calm. "I need you and Marcus and David to come to the penthouse, immediately, and bring a specialist in intellectual property law. The emergency meeting took place in Catherine's home office. The IP lawyer, a sharp-eyed man named Ben Carter, examined the moleskin notebook as if it were a holy relic. He compared her diagrams with Helios Dynamics' core patents, which he had pulled up on his laptop. "It's here," Carter said, his voice filled with a quiet awe. "The foundational logic, the system architecture. It's rudimentary, of course, but the core principles that the 415 patent is based on are undeniably sketched out in this notebook. In your hand." He looked at Catherine. "Mrs. Rutherford, did you ever sign a non-disclosure agreement or any document assigning intellectual property rights to your husband or the company?" "No," Catherine said. "I was his partner, his wife. It never occurred to me that I needed to." Jasmine Kaur leaned forward, a slow, dangerous smile spreading across her face. It was the smile of a predator that had just seen its prey walk into a perfectly laid trap. "Damien's lawyers are arguing that you are a vindictive spouse trying to extort money from their client," Jasmine said. "They're about to find out you're not a spouse. You're a co-founder, an uncredited, defrauded co-founder who is owed a hell of a lot more than half a condo and a stock portfolio." The strategy pivoted once again. They were no longer just suing for divorce. They were launching a multi-pronged assault. First, the divorce proceedings, now bolstered by the irrefutable evidence of the Theseus Trust, which Marcus Thorne had finally cracked open, revealing nearly $5 million siphoned from company accounts. This was not just dissipation of marital assets, it was embezzlement and wire fraud. Second, a new separate lawsuit filed by Ben Carter on Catherine's behalf against Helios Dynamics itself. The suit claimed foundational intellectual property theft, demanding retroactive recognition of her co-founder status and a corresponding equity stake in the company, plus damages. The 1-2 punch was devastating. When Damien and his legal team were served with the new lawsuit, the panic was palpable. Their narrative of the unstable, greedy wife was instantly obliterated. The evidence was undeniable. The moleskin notebook was their smoking gun. The Helios Dynamics board of directors, who had previously stood by their star CEO, was now in open revolt. Their visionary leader was not only an embezzler, but potentially a fraud who had built their company on stolen IP. Their stock price, which had been Damien's obsession, began to tremble. Damien was cornered. He was facing a catastrophic divorce, a shareholder rebellion, and potential federal charges. His empire was crumbling, and the architect of his destruction was the very woman he had tried to erase. He tried to reach her, sending desperate, pleading emails. He even showed up at the penthouse, violating the restraining order, only to be met by a stoic security guard who threatened to call the police. Finally, the call came not from Damien, but from his lead lawyer. He was requesting a settlement conference. It was the legal equivalent of a white flag of surrender. Catherine sat with her team in Jasmine Kaur's conference room, the Austin skyline glittering behind her. She was no longer just the wife. She was the woman who held all the cards. "They're scared," Jasmine said, looking at Catherine. "They will offer you a fortune to make this all go away quietly. But it's your call. We can take this to trial. We can burn him to the ground." Catherine looked down at her hands resting on her now prominent belly. The baby kicked a strong, reassuring movement. Burning Damien to the ground was tempting. The rage inside her still craved it. But she was a builder, not a demolisher. She didn't want rubble. She wanted a foundation. A new one for her and for her son. I don't want to burn him down, she said, her voice clear and strong. I want to buy him out. The settlement conference was held on neutral ground in a sprawling, soulless conference room at a downtown law firm. The air was thick with tension. On one side of the massive mahogany table sat Damien and his 3 lawyers, their faces grim. Damien looked haggard. The confident swagger was gone, replaced by a pallor of exhaustion and defeat. He refused to look at Catherine. On the other side sat Catherine, flanked by her legal team, Jasmine Kaur, the warrior, Marcus Thorne, the numbers man, David Chen, the shadow, and Ben Carter, the IP expert. Catherine was the picture of calm authority, dressed in a simple but elegant maternity dress of deep navy blue. She radiated a power that had nothing to do with money and everything to do with truth. Damien's lead attorney, a portly man named Gerald Finch, cleared his throat and began. He spoke of wanting to resolve this unfortunate family matter, amicably, of protecting the legacy of Helios Dynamics, of ensuring the privacy of all parties. He made an offer, a cash settlement of $50 million, the penthouse, the hill country home, and full ownership of her Tesla, all in exchange for a sealed agreement and her complete relinquishment of any and all claims to Helios Dynamics. It was a staggering sum, a king's ransom. A year ago it would have been unimaginable. Jasmine Kaur listened patiently until he finished. Then she simply said, "No." Finch blinked. "I beg your pardon. My client is not interested in a golden parachute," Jasmine said, her voice cutting through the stale air. "She's not leaving the company. She helped build it." Ben Carter then took the floor methodically and dispassionately, laying out the case for Catherine's foundational intellectual property contribution. He presented enlarged copies of the diagrams from her moleskin notebook alongside the company's core patents. The visual evidence was damning and irrefutable. Then Marcus Thorne stepped up. He detailed the forensic accounting of the Theseus Trust, tracing the flow of millions of dollars from Helios Dynamics accounts into the offshore trust. He explained that a full report was ready to be delivered to the SEC and the U.S. Attorney's Office, detailing wire fraud, embezzlement, and conspiracy. A muscle twitched in Damien's jaw. His lawyers shifted uncomfortably in their seats. Finally, Catherine spoke. Her voice, when it came, was not filled with rage or bitterness, but with a chilling, surgical precision. "You didn't just have an affair, Damien," she said, looking at him directly for the first time, forcing him to meet her gaze. "You tried to erase me. You took my work, my contributions, and you built your name on them while planning to discard me and our child. You didn't want a partner. You wanted an audience. And when I was no longer convenient, you decided to replace me piece by piece." She let the words hang in the air. $50 million is not the price of my silence. It's not the price of my contribution. It is frankly an insult. She slid a single sheet of paper across the table. It was her offer, her terms. They were simple and brutal. 1. Damien would immediately resign as CEO of Helios Dynamics, citing personal reasons. 2. He would transfer 40% of his 60% ownership stake in the company directly to Catherine. This would make her the majority shareholder. 3. The remaining 20% of his shares would be placed in an irrevocable trust for their son Julian, to be managed by Catherine until he turned 25. 4. Damien would be left with nothing. No shares, no golden parachute, no severance. He could keep his vintage Porsche and his personal effects. 5. In exchange, Catherine would not pursue private legal action related to the embezzlement, and the divorce would be finalized quietly. The sworn affidavit from Isabella Rossi and the forensic report on the trust would remain sealed contingent on his full and immediate compliance. Damien's lawyer, Finch, stared at the paper, his face ashen. This is absurd. You're trying to take his entire life's work. No, Catherine corrected him calmly. I'm taking back my life's work. He can go and build another one. Damien finally snapped. You can't do this, Catherine. He snarled, his voice cracking. I gave you everything. Catherine stood up, her regal calm unshaken. She placed a hand on her belly. You gave me nothing that I didn't already have, Damien. You just put a price tag on it. And you gave me the one thing that matters most. She looked down at her bump. You gave me my son, and for his sake I am securing his legacy, the one you tried to steal. She looked at her team. We're done here. They rose as one and walked out of the room, leaving Damien and his lawyers to stare at the single sheet of paper that represented the total annihilation of his world. They had no choice. A public trial would mean shareholder lawsuits that would bankrupt the company and almost certain jail time for Damien. They accepted her terms within the hour. The aftermath was swift and quiet. Damien Rutherford, the titan of Austin Tech, resigned. The official story was that he was stepping back to focus on his family after a difficult divorce. The tech blogs buzzed for a week, and then the world moved on. Catherine Vance Rutherford was appointed interim CEO by the board, a move that stunned the industry, but was unanimously supported by the shareholders who had been briefed on the true situation. She proved to be more than capable. Her vision was clear, her leadership decisive. She wasn't the charismatic showman Damien had been, but she was a brilliant strategist and a builder. She restructured the company, promoted deserving talent, and established a new culture of transparency and integrity. Isabella Rossi, having provided her affidavit, disappeared. Catherine had ensured she received a small anonymous settlement from the recovered trust funds, enough to start over somewhere new. A gesture of grace for a woman who was in the end just another one of Damien's victims. 3 months after the settlement, Catherine gave birth to a healthy baby boy, Julian Vance. She dropped the Rutherford from her name and from his. 1 year later, Catherine stood in a bright, airy office space in a newly renovated downtown building. It was the headquarters of her new passion project, the Vance Foundation, funded by Helios Dynamics, soaring profits. The foundation's mission was to support and fund female entrepreneurs in science and technology. On the wall behind her desk was a framed diagram, the first schematic she had ever drawn in that old moleskin notebook. Her son Julian, now a babbling toddler, played on a colorful mat at her feet. She looked down at him, her heart filled with a fierce, profound love. The pain of Damien's betrayal would likely never vanish completely, but it no longer defined her. It was just a part of her story, the fire that had forged her into the woman she was, now a mother, a CEO, a philanthropist, a builder. She had lost a husband, a fantasy, a life she thought she wanted. But in the wreckage, she had found something far more valuable herself. She had faced the ultimate betrayal and had not only survived but thrived, building a new, better world on the foundations of a ruined one. And that was a legacy worth fighting for. Catherine's story is a powerful reminder that the deepest betrayals can sometimes lead to our greatest transformations. She turned a devastating discovery into a declaration of independence, proving that strength isn't about the absence of pain, but about what you choose to build from its ashes. She didn't just get revenge. She reclaimed her past, secured her future, and built a legacy of integrity for her son. Her story is a testament to resilience, strategy, and the unyielding power of a woman who knows her worth. What did you think of Catherine's final move? Was it justice, or was it a cold-blooded takeover? Let us know your thoughts in the comments below. If this story moved you, please give this video a like and share it with someone who needs to hear a story of strength. And don't forget to subscribe and hit the notification bell for more true-life dramas that will leave you breathless.